Hey there, Tish Campbell here, and I am going to give you the 10-foot view of two systems, both the digestive and the urinary system. So what are we going to talk about? First, we're going to talk about some cool facts about both the digestive system and the urinary system, including what structures are involved, what are the functions of these structures, and then how do these relate to nutrition. So it might seem obvious that in terms of nutrition, food is the very food that we eat is where we get all of our nutrients and energy, and those nutrients then become energy. But the cool thing about digestion is, first of all, we have this tube that's an estimated between 16 and a half feet and 23 feet that runs from the mouth to our rectum or anus. And humans on average eat between 102, or scratch that, 1.2 pounds to 6 pounds per day. Now that obviously is a big gap in variation, and that statistic came from around the entire world, which it would be interesting to see, where those individuals were eating the 1.2 pounds. I would argue that it would not be in the United States versus the 6 pounds. The gut, as we also call kind of the stomach, but really when we think about digestion, we think about it, or most people think about it, just occurring in the stomach, when really the vast majority, and actually I'll skip down here, the vast majority of this digestion absorption happen in the small intestine. Digestion typically takes for the average person between 30 and 40 hours. Obviously you can have some variation in that, but from mouth to rectum, usually between 30 and 40 hours. And then a really interesting one where a lot of research coming out about this is this idea that the gut, and again, when we think about the gut, we think about the stomach, but really it's the stomach, the small intestines, large intestines, and this entire system that we're going to talk about. But they talk about it as a second brain, whereas, and also a fun fact here is the gut contains more serotonin than the actual brain. And when we think about SSRIs, we think about serotonin and taking these antidepressants, for example, to raise these serotonin levels in the brain. But we have, like I just said, this good amount in the gut, and the idea that the gut also affects our mood. And so the gut is also the enteric system, which is known as the second brain in this brain, gut-brain axis, which, again, a lot of very interesting research coming out about that. So let's go forward and look a little bit about the structure. So we have two main parts of the digestive system. We have the gastrointestinal tract, also called the GI tract, well, for short. And another word for this long tube, which is known as the gastrointestinal tract, is the alimentary canal. And here, alimentary means nourishment. So part of that system are all of the parts along this tube that we'll see another slide in a second that will get into that. But we have the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and then that large intestine, which is also at the very end of that, like referred to as the colon. And then these accessory organs, which, for example, like the teeth, the mouth, the salivary glands, participate in both chemical and mechanical digestion, with the teeth performing even with the mouth, because it kind of, this amount of food, the bolsa, is then churned, if you will, in the mouth through the mechanical digestion that the teeth provides from the chomping. But again, so then we have the teeth, tongue, salivary glands, the liver produces bile that is then stored in the gallbladder, and then also the many enzymes that are contributed from the pancreas. So if we look at this, kind of a lot going on, but the main thing here is that each one of these segments looks at the mechanical and chemical digestion, and then the absorption once we get past the mouth, as far as where stuff, if you will, is happening from this digestive system. So we have the mouth, we have the mechanical digestion with the chewing and the swallowing, as I said, and then we have some amyloid lipase and we have some lingual lipase, which helps begin with the fat digesting, which is a fat digesting enzyme. And then we have the salivary glands, which are in the back of the mouth. They secrete the salivary amylase, which helps break down and start the digestion of the carbs. Then the food passes down the esophagus, and we'll talk about the sphincters here in a second, and then goes into the stomach here. And the stomach has these 3 layers of muscles all running in different directions, and they secrete gastric juices, which kill the hydrochloric acid. They also produce pepsin, which begins the digestion of protein, but this starts out as pepsinogen. And then we have also the secretion of gastrin, which helps certain, many digestive processes that will then happen. And then we look here and we also have the absorption of lipid-soluble substances, and then alcohol and aspirin. So moving down here, so actually let's just talk about this cardiac sphincter, or the lower esophageal sphincter. So essentially, and we have all of these valves that basically help keep the food in the position that it needs to be so it doesn't go back up. So this cardiac sphincter is also called the lower esophageal sphincter. We also have an upper esophageal sphincter that's up here. But then as we go down into the stomach, so then we have the stomach and the beginning of the small intestine. So the pylorus is the terminal part of the stomach here, but then we have this pyloric sphincter that separates the food from the small intestine and to the stomach. So then here we have the small intestine, where many things take place, basically the chemical digestion of the carbs, fats, polypeptides. So here the polypeptides, like the RNA and DNA, so the absorption begins and ends for these polypeptides in the small intestine. So this is the small intestine. The ileocecal valve is at the bottom part of this small intestine. So here's where we go into the large intestine, where we have no chemical digestion except for bacteria, and we do have the absorption of ions, water, and minerals, and as we'll see a bit more in the next slide here. Just a bit more about this pyloric sphincter here, though. So while all of these valves help control the flow of this digestive material from one area to another, the pyloric sphincter plays an important role because it helps control the rate of digestion and the direction of the movement into the digestive tract. So also I'd like to mention that when it gets in the mouth, so we get food entering the mouth, then we get this, it's referred to as bolsa, so this kind of pile of food. And then as it moves down, it's then thought of as, or referred to as, chyme. Okay, so moving on here, just a couple more diagrams to kind of give you different vantage points of this digestive system. So in this one specifically, I want to refer to what are the 6 basic processes of digestion, and you'll see here we have ingestion, so the food goes in the mouth, secretion of many enzymes from glands, and again the star here would be the pancreas. Pancreas supplies many digestive enzymes. Motility, digestion, absorption. Remember, the main absorption occurs from the small intestine, and then finally the defecation, feces, or pooing, as we should also call it. And then moving down, we have a couple more diagrams. So here, as I mentioned, the salivary amylase starts the digestion here of the carbohydrates. In the stomach, we have the stars of this process, pepsin and HCl, the hydrochloric acid. Then we have the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, which are the 3 sections of the small intestine. And if you see here, as I said before, all of these nutrients that are making their way into our system here. And I'd like to point out here, because this is very interesting, that while most of the carbs, all of the carbs, from my understanding, the carbs and proteins go into this systemic circulation through the blood, the actual fat ones, and then the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, actually go through the lymphatic system. So that's really interesting here. And then the colon, as I said before, it's also referred to as the large intestine. So then here, just another chart that I found that was interesting. We have the various nutrients and then the route in which they take. And as I mentioned here, we have the fat going through the lymph here. And so that about wraps up the digestive system. Okay, so the urinary system. So I have 2 diagrams here. And basically what I was trying to point out here by the diagrams is when many people think about the urinary system, they might think of, oh yeah, it has these 2 kidneys that are involved in it. But it's such a complex system that goes far beyond simple urination. So here I have this picture down here, and again, well, not again, but the nephron being the functional unit of the kidneys. But I want to point out that the kidneys are really the star of this, not only the star of the urinary system, but really just, I think, an unsung hero of the body. And then here's why. So The blood flow in the kidneys is higher than the blood flow to the heart, liver, and brain. Again, we mainly think about this as being, or I know I did, as far as just simply urination. 0.5% of total body mass is what the kidneys make up, yet they receive 20 to 25% of the resting blood flow that we get. In a single hour, the kidneys receive, and this is a single hour, receive about 120 pints of blood. Think about a pint of milk. And then think about in 1 hour, 120 of those pints filter through these various nephrons in the body. It is essentially the body's filtration system. And then 6% of our total energy, or ATP, is used by the system for for many of the primary active transport mechanisms, to include the sodium-potassium pump. So in itself, the urinary system, pretty simple. We have the two kidneys. We have the ureters, the two ureters on the right and left side. We have the bladder, which is the urinary holding tank, and then the urethra, which is different in males and females. Males have 3 different parts. It's longer. It's also the same tube that bears the reproductive organs, or is part of the reproductive organs, whereas it is 2 different things in females. Okay, so I do have just a couple pictures to kind of show the intricate nature of these kidneys. So we have, first the view of the individual, which then we take one kidney here, where we have the urinary collection duct. We have the cortex, which is the outer layer, and then these medullas, which are the internal layers of all of these. And then if we were to take one of these chunks out, we will see that we have this system right here is called a nephron, and this is the functional unit of the kidneys. And there are between 1 and 2 million of these per kidney. It's a pretty insane process. And then we have the detailed structure of the nephron. And you just see how complicated it is. And we have one more picture to show this. So again, if I'm just to orientation here, we have this is about to be what's blown up, and then this stretched out. So we have the nephron with the glomera. Sorry, my pronunciation may be wrong. Glomera. And then on top of that, the capsule, Bowman's capsule, and then just the various parts and where things happen, as in, so here this is impermeable to water, here this is permeable to water, and just the complex interplay of this. Again, this is the functional unit, and there are between 1 and 2 million of these per kidney. Okay, so what about the function of the major kidneys? Well, first of all, as what we think about the most is we have the removal of metabolic waste. Sorry for my little typo there. Let's just fix that. Metabolic waste, toxins, and drugs. It also regulates the total water volume and total solute concentration that we know as osmolarity. And then we have the regulation in blood ion concentrate. So the kidney helps regulate the blood levels of several ions. We're talking about sodium ions, potassium ions, calcium chloride, and phosphate ions. And the cool thing is the kidney does this by adjusting these ions that are excreted. That is how it regulates the entire ionic concentration of the blood. We also have the ensuring the long-term balance of the acid-base balance, so essentially the regulation of our blood pH. And then some of our endocrine function/secretions. We have the regulation of vitamin D, which the active form of vitamin D is calcitriol, which helps regulate calcium homeostasis. We also have, and this is a bit out of order, and the renin, I'm not for sure is part of the endocrine system, but it is, I believe, a hormone that helps regulate blood pressure. For example, when blood pressure is low, the kidneys will secrete this, and it will help raise it in terms of keeping that homeostatic relationship. And then we also have the regulation of blood glucose levels, which we'll see in the next slide. And this is also a good segue into this in terms of looking at how the nutrients. So for the digestive system, I looked and focused on and gave information about all the different types of macronutrients. And here I'm focusing on one micronutrient, and that is the carbohydrates. And within that, a specific carbohydrate, or the simplest carbohydrate, which is the glucose. So what happens when we find blood glucose in the urine, and how is that? Let me actually go back, sorry. So as far as how the kidney helps regulate the blood glucose levels. So like the liver can use